name is Rosani Rios. I am the Strategic Populations Manager for the Office of Workforce Development. Today, I will be discussing priority of service. But before I jump into discussing what priority of service is and how to implement it, it is important to clarify that determining priority of service takes place after you, as a case manager, have completed the first step in the adult enrollment process, which is determining adult eligibility. The first question the case manager has to answer is the individual eligible for Title I services? If the answer is yes, then we move to the next step, which is determining if the individual belongs into one of the priority category groups, which is what we're going to be addressing today. Because this is going to be an interactive training, let's see how much you know about priority of service before I start giving you some information. We have our first poll question. I'm going to read the poll question, and after I read it, please type in the chat your answer. This is a question. Priority of service applies to both adult and dislocated worker. A for true, B for false. Oh, yes. Those of you that answer false, you are correct. Priority of service only applies to the adult program. It does not apply to youth, and it doesn't apply to dislocated worker. So those of you that answer B, you are correct. Now, let's move to explain what priority of service is. In simple terms, priority of service simply means to provide services earlier in time to those individuals who belong to certain priority groups with higher needs. That's what priority of service means. And as I explained before, priority service is not part of the eligibility process, or is not an eligibility requirement. Priority of service takes place after eligibility has been established. So it's step 2 in the enrollment process. It's important to understand that inclusion in a priority group does not bypass WIOA eligibility. Therefore, the eligibility has to be established first, and priority of service doesn't bypass that eligibility. And as we clearly explained through our poll question, priority of service only applies to adult program. Now, because this is going to be interactive, as I said, we're going to have our first scenario. I'm going to read the scenario, and as we did before, you're going to type the answer in the chat. Gabriel is an English language learner who is 26 years old and comes to your one-stop requesting funding for training. Gabriel explains that he is waiting for his work permit from immigration. What should you do next? A, validate Gabriel's priority of service status as Gabriel is basic skills deficient. B, explain to Gabriel that he does not qualify for WIOA Title I services. C, explain to Gabriel that he can come back to request training services once he received his work permit, and let him know that in the meantime, he can access basic career services offered through the One Stop. And the correct answer is C. Explain to Gabriel that he can come back to request training services once he has received his work permit, and let him know that he can access basic career services in the meantime. Why C is the correct answer and not B? Because if you simply tell Gabriel that he doesn't qualify, he might leave the office thinking that he will never qualify for WIOA Title I services, when in reality, he can't qualify right now because he's waiting for his permit, but he will qualify once he get that permit. And we need to make sure that we're clear in the information that we provide to our participants. Also, it is important to remember that basic career services are available to all. So even though he might not have his work permit, because basic career services are available to everyone and he doesn't need to meet eligibility, he can access those services and start getting ready for that job that he is going to receive and start getting ready for that job that he is going to obtain. Moving on in our training, let's talk about the order of priority of service. It is important to understand that USDOL provides priority to veterans across all of their programs. This includes WIOA Title I programs, and we need to understand how to apply priority of service. What's the order? So the order of priority of service is as follows. We should always serve first, veterans and eligible spouses that also belong to one of the three priority of service groups, which are low income, public assistance recipients, or basic skills deficient. The second group that we should serve are individuals who are not veterans or eligible spouses, but they are part of the one of the three priority groups, low income, public assistance recipients, and or basic skills deficient. The third group are veterans and eligible spouses that do not belong to the priority groups. And the four groups is everybody else, individuals outside of the groups, but they still meet that basic WIOA eligibility criteria. Because remember, priority of service does not bypass eligibility for adults or basic adult eligibility criteria. Now we have another question for you. Type your answer in the chat. In order for an individual to be part of priority of service, that individual has to be low income. A, true, B, false. And the correct answer is B. This is not true. And it can be a little bit confusing to understand why an individual does not have to be low income in order to be in the priority of service. And I'm going to explain you why. And this has to do with how priority of service was implemented under WIA and the changes that WIOA brought to priority of service. When we were under WIA, priority of service was only implemented when the local areas were running out of funds for adult services. And it only covered individuals that were low income. Low income either meaning that they receive they were low income and received public assistance, or low income because they just met one of the categories or the criteria to be considered low income for our program. Now, WIOA had two important changes to priority of service. The first change was that they added an additional group to the group of individuals that are eligible for priority of service. Now, individuals who are basic skills deficient are also part of these priority groups. And the other important change to priority of service that WIOA implemented was that regardless of the amount of money that a local area has for adult services, they have to implement priority of service at all times. This is no longer an option when funding are running low. This is something that we have to determine every single time that we are serving an adult. These changes were significant. So it is important to understand that now for priority of service, and the individual only needs to be part of one of the three priority groups. The individual is low income and receive public assistance. The individual is low income through a different mean, or the individual is basic skills deficient. This means that an individual who is basic skills deficient does not need to be also low income to be included in the priority of service. So it is very important to understand that with this significant change, if an individual is basic skills deficient, that is enough for the individual to be able to be part of priority of service, meaning that that individual does not need to be low income to be included in the priority of service. The basic skills deficient category is enough for that individual to be part of priority of service. And because basic skills deficient by itself is enough, we really need to understand the meaning of basic skills deficient. An individual is considered basic skills deficient when that individual doesn't have a high school diploma or its equivalent and is not enrolled in a secondary education. That individual is performed at 8.9 grade level or below, or the individual is considered an English language learner. Let me just pause here and say that individuals that are eligible for Title II adult ed services, they're eligible and they're receiving Title II adult ed services, they are considered for our purposes, basic skills deficient. If an individual is an English language learner, that individual is also considered a basic skills deficient. And we have received some questions about what really means to be an English language learner. So let's just talk about what an English language learner, who meets these criteria. An English language learner is an individual that first and foremost struggles with the English language. That individual is a person who has limited ability to speak, read, write, or understand in English. That's the first part of the definition for an English language learner. And in addition to the individual struggle with the English language, this individual either lives in a family or community where they speak in language other than English, or their own primary language is other than English. Let me explain this with a practical example. As you can hear in my presentation, I speak with an accent because English is not my first language. English is actually my second language. But I am not considered an English language learner because I no longer struggle with speaking, reading, writing, or understanding English, even though I speak a different language as my first language. So in order for someone to be considered an English language learner, that individual has to struggle with the English language and then meet one of the other two conditions. English being their second language or living in a family or community where English is not the dominant language. It is important to mention here that English language learner, this status can be validated using self-attestation and or case notes in the record. So now that we have discussed the definition of an English language learner, let's put our knowledge into practice with a practical scenario. As we have done before, enter the right answer in the chat. Let me read the scenario for you. Robert comes to your one-stop referred by your local Title II adult ed program. He is seeking Title I funds to complete an integrated education and training IET welding program. After establishing basic Title I adult eligibility, you are determining if Robert qualifies for priority of service. What would be the most effective way to determine priority of service for Robert? A, ask Robert for proof of receipt of public assistance. B, verify if Robert lives in a high poverty area using the census tract information. C, validate Robert's basic skills deficiency status, entering a case note to document the referral from Title II. answer is C. Why? Because you don't have to ask the participant for anything. You already have all the documentation that you need when Robert comes to you with the referral from Title II. Because as we explained before, if someone is receiving services through Adult Ed Title II, that individual will be considered basic skills deficient for our regulations. So you just need to enter a note validating that you received the referral when you receive it, and that's it. That's the easiest way in which we can enter Rover into priority of service. Let's discuss priority of service and its relation with low income. There's a few important considerations. First, low income determination is only required when the individual is not basic skills deficient, meaning that if that individual comes to you referred by an approved Title II adult ed program, you know that that individual is basic skills deficient. You have to write the note, get the referral, and that will be sufficient for you to designate that individual within the priority of service group. Therefore, LWDAs should screen adult individuals for basic skills deficiency as part of their process to establish priority of service. We are very good at screening individuals for low income because that's what we have been doing. We did that before under WIA, and it's normal to us. Now that basic skills deficiency is part of this group for priority of service, we need to have local mechanisms to screen individuals early on in our enrollment process for basic skills deficiency as well. LWDAs should utilize the easiest option to establish priority of service based upon the individual's unique circumstances. We want you to work smart and not hard. Therefore, if it is easier for you to determine the individual as part of the priority of service utilizing basic skills deficiency, that's the route that you should take. If it's easier to determine priority of service based on that individual recipient of public assistance status, then you use that option. Use what is easiest for you based on that individual's unique circumstances. And we're talking about you screening and adding additional processes to your enrollment process at the beginning when you are working with a participant. And we want to make sure that you have the tools that you need in order to do this. Therefore, we have created a job aid, a tool for you. We have created a basic skills screening tool, and this tool is something that you can add as part of your enrollment process, and it's a printable PDF form that you can edit. You can have it online, and just the individual can complete the form, and that way you can screen in early on in your process for basic skills deficiency. We want to make sure that you have the tools that you need in order to be able to do this screening, in order to be able to do your work. And we are going to be facilitating this tool to you at the end of this training or the week following the training. Excellent. Now that we have talked about basic skills deficiency, what it is, the importance of basic skills deficiency determination for priority of service, now let's talk about low income as it refers to priority of service. We understand that establishing low income status can be a complex process that is challenging at times. And we are going to be dedicating a whole training on determining low income and understanding how to utilize the LLSIL standard and the poverty line and all of that. But in this training, I'm just gonna basically touch on the different criteria that can allow someone to be determined low income, the different criteria that we can utilize to determine that someone is low income. One of the easiest ways in which we can determine low income is by identifying someone as a public assistance recipient, and whether the individual or the family has received public assistance recipient within the past 6 months. And there's three allowable public assistance recipients for us, the state of Georgia. The first one is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. The second one is the Supplemental Security Income Program. And the third one is a Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. Those are the three public assistance programs that if the person is receiving assistance through these three programs, they will be considered a public assistance recipient for our regulations, and therefore they will be considered low income. The other way in which we can determine if someone is low income is by calculating the total family income. This is a more comprehensive process, and as I said, we're going to be dedicating an entire training on how to do this, and we're going to be providing you with tools to help you make this determination the easiest, less comprehensive or complex way possible. There are other criteria that can allow the individual to be low income. One of those criteria is if you are serving someone that is homeless by statute, that individual will be considered low income. Also, if you are serving a participant that receive a reduced or free lunch, that will and this designation is done based on the parents' income, that individual will be considered low income. If you're serving a foster care child by statute, that individual will be considered low income. And if you're serving someone with a disability, automatically that person will be considered a family income of one, meaning that only the income of the actual participant will be taken into consideration instead of taking into consideration the rest of the family. And oftentimes that allows individuals with disabilities to be deemed low income. And as I said before, we're going to have an entire training on low income determination and how to do it, what is applicable, what is not applicable. But we wanted to give uh, low income and low income determination enough time. And we want to make sure that we are providing you with a comprehensive training on it. Therefore, we're just going to cover low income as we just did, the basics of it, and how it relates to priority of service. As a way to summarize what we have talked about regarding priority of service and low income status, it's important to remember that in determining an adult uh, eligible, low income has no law, right? Um, we just need to make sure that that individual meets the basic eligibility requirements plus underemployed or unemployed. But low income plays a key role when we are answering step two of this process, which is determining whether the person um, qualifies for priority of service or not. So that's the only relevance of low income when you're enrolling an individual at the beginning. There's a note here in these slides that says income might be considered later on in an individual's participation if needing further services. Sometimes we need to look at the income status of a participant to determine whether that participant is suitable for supported services or other training services. But that is a step or a question that we need to answer later on in the participants uh, process, not right now when we are just establishing eligibility and then priority of service. And as most of you might know, low income has no applicability to dislocated worker program. We want to let you know that we are working hard on creating job aids and trainings to help you continue to do what you do. And we are so grateful for what you do. And we understand that the work that we do is hard and is complex. Therefore, our office is putting together some job aids and additional trainings for you. And with that, this concludes my presentation.